Welcome to the webinar. I am Kamalpreet Kaur, student of Master of Business Management.
I am Lovepreet Kaur, student of Postgraduate Diploma of Business Management. Our today's topic is Human Resource Management in the Gig Economy, Challenges and Strategic Responses. In this slide, I am talking about learning objectives. In the case of the first session, its outcomes include but are not confined to participants are capable of explaining factors that distinguish gig work and traditional employment and their reliance on digital platforms. Second, this is the capacity to critically evaluate the underlying problems to gig work in human resources, contracts, well-being, and engagement. It will also be able to implement HR in a manner that is balanced between the interests of the organization and the rights of the worker. This, together with the organization HR strategy outcomes, is aligned with the international and New Zealand particular context outcomes, ensuring that HR professionals are prepared to meet the future workplace demands. These findings serve both global studies and New Zealand context so that HR practitioners are prepared to work in the changed world. In this slide, I am talking about introduction to gig work. The gig economy is typically described as flexible and work that is short term and based on the app. In New Zealand, rideshare, food delivery, and IT contracting are the main areas of gig work, with Uber, Fever, and Deliveroo being predominant in most locations. One of the most fragrant HR systems evaluation is gig work. New Zealand post-pandemic has been a boom in the platform of employment, which signals a fundamental shift in the gig work. This is a new form of work structure, breaks the conventional HR structures. It is not in doubt that defining these new forms of employment is full of emerging risks, and in the context of equity, this is what HR leaders should mitigate. And in this slide, I'm talking about growth of gig economy. The application of technology to optimize workflow has created a growth of the gig economy on the global scale. The platformization of employment in New Zealand has been growing, especially since the pandemic. Gig work is difficult to measure because the lack of formal definitions and hidden workers. In any case, numerous individuals are IT contracting, ride sharing, and food delivery individuals. The gig economy exists in two-sided perception. On the one hand, it is viewed as a cheap labor source by the business, and on the other hand, workers enjoy the new flexibility. But in this scenario, the lack of human resources strategies, which is underchecked growth, may prove to be harmful in terms of fairness, compliance, and sustainability. And in this slide, gig work is not about the same employment as traditional. Workers value independence, but the platforms exercise their control in a number of ways. The gig workers consider functions that accompany HRM systems to be naively without a balance. Busy workers tend to work different jobs on multiple platforms, but without job security, paid leaves, or career growth. One of the biggest fears concerning the reliance on algorithm ratings is that they generate stress. These attributes make the question of retention in the gig economy a dilemma among the HR professionals. And the gig work is not like the traditional employment. Workers like independence, but websites dominate by use of many strategies. The gig workers see functions relating to HR systems as simplistic lack of balance. Workers tend to do multiple jobs across many platforms but lack job security, paid leave, and professional growth. One of the main issues of reliance on algorithm ratings is that they can generate stress. These attributes make the question of retention in the gig economy a challenging one to the HR people. In this slide, I am talking about HR challenge contracts. Contracts are highly misconstrued whether it comes to the valuation of gig worker or otherwise. One of the worker is loudly protesting that their employers are actively denying them fundamental rights when the employers insist that they need to work remotely. Contracts are cast as long having a repatriation option because case studies of New Zealand based delivery workers receiving the low wages and not feeling safe during the pandemic pay them low wages, fair pay agreements to self-employment and gig consultations, whereas platforms are simply against such suggestions. Contract mistakes with the communications that have been aggravated by the pandemic, highlighting the fact that contracts do not listen to the voice of the workers. And it is the deeper case of the failure of contracts to cope with the issue. Consistent, non-aligned, and legally viable contracts of employment are essential to the minimization of conflict. And in this slide, I am talking about HR challenge well-being. The well-being of gig workers is often inadequate. Financial insecurity, irregular income, and the lack of benefits create an environment of stress and poor health. Support the fact that sick leave and insurance are not benefits most drivers possess. It indicates that during COVID-19, NZ platforms workers enjoyed only limited access to communication. Barriers are immigrant gig workers face that worsen the well-being deficit. Well-being strategies and for HR professionals are expected to cover finances, health and communication at the minimum, along with support for multiple demographics. In this slide, I am talking about HR challenge engagement. In a gig setting, it is hard to realize how effective design disengagement. As it is mentioned, platforms rarely provide a feeling of community or recognition. Without any opportunity to promote, gig workers grow disengaged very quickly. There is lack of promotion opportunities in employees, and in turn, it makes them feel like insignificant cogs in a bigger machine. This can be elevated when the HR adopts online forms, appreciation programs, and micro learning modules. These efforts, although small and simple, can foster a feeling of belongingness and thus enable HR to develop engagement in the face of not having full time contracts. In this slide, the gig economy opens new doors, but it also comes with its hurdles. Companies have the privilege of drawing talent from an expensive global market. Gig models help companies remain flexible by increasing or decreasing labor demand at their discretion. The innovation is more likely to be generated from work carried out on platforms because of the access to an external talent pool. In New Zealand, IT contractors serve as an emerging case of gig workers supporting the startup ecosystem. The balance is how to leverage such opportunities while ensuring social equity and environmentally friendly practices. And in this slide, I am talking about international comparisons. Regulations is different in different countries. The Uber case in the UK led to the 2021 Supreme Court Uber case that provided some workers protection to Uber drivers. With the recent 2023 amendment of the gig economy law in Australia, safeguards that can be granted to delivery and rideshare gig workers have significantly improved, and the fair pay agreements in New Zealand is not fully implemented yet and is mostly opposed on the platform side. The following differences are some of the ways the regulation of platform is realized. Work is different in various but to allow the HR professional in New Zealand to estimate the probability of the introduction of a certain regulatory change in New Zealand, observation of the trends in the global arena is expected.
Mhm. Now I am talking about critical evolution. In both extremes, it is quite common to have the positive and the negative sides of a given issue. As an example, we can consider a gig economy. It is true that using A gig economy encourages creativity and innovation as well as provides organizations with flexibility. The trends of gig economy in New Zealand expose workers to an increased degree of vulnerability and significant insufficiency of legal coverage. The legal cases in New Zealand indicate the loopholes present in the employment law. The arguments in the literature justify a two-way solution to afford the greatest amount of flexibility at the lowest level of fairness. This means that policies should be designed to reap such benefits without entrenching structural inequality. Deep rooted to human resource managers. And the next one, HR recommendations contracts. Any contract strategies should be based on equity and transparency. Striking an imperative versus compliance is critical. The risks of OPQ remuneration structures are demonstrated by the evidence emerging in New Zealand that highlights the need to be transparent. Companies are exposed to legal and reputational losses in case contracts are not in line with the labor laws applicable in an organization. Incorporation of fair pay agreement principles is also helpful to HR professionals to encourage trust and reduce litigation besides assisting organizations in staying competitive and ethical. And the next one is HR recommendations well-being. It is important to have well-being strategies for gig workers. Mental health aids deal with the anxiety caused by the absence of financial stability and the workload. Income smoothing or minimum pay guarantees reduce instability. Peer support groups reduce isolation, which improves social connection during caregiving platform work. Immigrant workers face discrimination and limited career advancement, which struggle with further. This needs specific HR strategies by community well-being. HR leaders know the gig workers are treated with the dignity, which promotes better relations for work, which is sustainable. In this slide, HR recommendations engagement. Prospects for engagement in gig work may be low due to absence of organizational bonds. Digital communities being places of belonging enable peer connections. Appreciate and acknowledgement programs pay attention to contributions made even in short duration assignments. And engagement is positively correlated with the opportunities created by micro learning. Employee voice platforms constructed on the principles of justice allow for the transparent debate on the absence of engagement and the appropriation of the engagement. And the next one, it is the duty of HR to devise engagement programs that enhance bonds of trust and cohesion. In their efforts to include gig workers in the organization, engagement strategies must highlight the absence of trust and connection, bipolar that contractual flexibility work agreements. HR recommendations engagement. The reasons why these gig workers have such difficulties are mirrors of bigger issues of the system. Delivery drivers whose problems gave rise to the strike were unhappy with the customer relationship management system that paid less than the mark and termed the system unfair and unsafe. Research indicates that there existed a massive increase and decrease in stability in income during the pandemic. Among these gig workers, immigrants are the worst affected because they have no upward mobility and are discriminated upon by institutions. The voice of workers is today emerging. The case study demonstrated how the HR leaders have failed to take action to develop strategies that are fair and imbalanced to the specific problems of social and economic imbalance. Next one case example, NZ gig workers. First one, almost everything on the digital stage is completely integrated and automated, and the presence of artificial intelligence is such that algorithms decide who to give the worker a job, how to pay the worker, when to punish the worker in the event of wrongdoing, and all with minimal or no human intervention. All the people working digitally in the digital platforms are referred to as an app workforce, and even though workers do not receive much or no feedback, they are okay with being tapped on the shoulder when working. The whole rating system and evaluation process is not only biased but is frequently not fair or transparent. The point at which the rights of the workers become a secondary to the gain of the corporation. The exploitation of the gig economy is noticeable. Technology in the application thereof must and should be ethically approached so that it does not supersede the pillars of reasonableness. In this slide, technology and HRM. Almost all digital platforms are fully integrated and automated, and with the artificial intelligence present, it is the algorithms that choose which worker to assign on what tasks, how much to compensate the worker, when to administer punishment if needed, all with little to no human involvement. The entire working population with the digital platforms is classified as an app workforce, and all the workers receive little to no feedback. They are comfortable being tapped on the shoulder while working. The entire rating system and approach to evolution is not only biased but often lacks basic fairness or transparency. The moment worker rights are much secondary to the profit of the company. The exploitation with the gig economy becomes apparent. The technology used should and must be practiced with an ethical approach in order for it to not replace the fundamental principles of fairness. In this slide, future outlook. As digital platforms continue to expand, so will the gig economy. In New Zealand, stronger regulation is predicted, and the debates over fair pay agreements are likely to reshape work. Pandemics are external shocks to the economy that highlight weaknesses, and the gig economy is no exception. HR's primary concern is to add sustainability and inclusivity, ensuring that the absence of protection will not undermine the fairness of gig work. It is innovational yet ethical to make provisions that protect the workers and allow organizations to take advantage of the flexible labor markets. In this slide, I'm talking about participatory question. The first one, we are now interested in hearing your responses to a set of two questions. To begin with, in what ways, if any, has the gig economy changed HRM practices in New Zealand, with particular references to your own organization? Also, of the three major challenges of HR, contracts, well-being, and engagement, which one do you consider the most pressing, and for what reason? And the next, a further question which is currently quite contentious. How is best to define the status of gig workers? And the next one is, are they employees, contractors, or is there a new third category? What is your opinion? What action should HR take in order to maintain a reasonable level of procedural and substantive equity and inclusion without losing too much rigidity? And the last one is, what ways do you think New Zealand should pursue the regulation of gig work in the next 5 years in order to encourage innovation while ensuring adequate protection for workers. Here are the references we used for the presentation. These sources helped us to prepare and support our content.
Thank you.